Welcome. In this explainer, we're going to provide a clear, structured overview of the clinical practice guidelines for managing bladder trauma. We'll walk through the key evidence-based recommendations, covering everything from diagnosis and management all the way through to postoperative care.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to follow the typical clinical workflow. We'll start with how to diagnose a bladder injury, then get into the crucial difference between intraperitoneal and extraperitoneal ruptures. After that, we'll cover how to repair intraperitoneal ruptures, how to manage extraperitoneal ones, and we'll finish up with the standards for post-repair catheterization. Okay, let's dive into our first section, diagnosing bladder injury. This is all about that critical first step, figuring out which patients actually need imaging. Guideline Statement 14A gives us a really clear absolute indication for imaging. Now, it's important to remember that a pelvic fracture alone isn't enough to warrant bladder imaging. But when you see the combination of gross hematuria and a pelvic fracture in a stable patient, that's a mandatory indication. You have to perform a retrograde cystography. So why is this recommendation so strong? Well, the data shows that bladder injury is found in a whopping 29% of patients who present with both of those findings, gross hematuria and a pelvic fracture. That prevalence is just too high to ignore, which is why immediate and definitive imaging is the standard of care. Now, technique is absolutely crucial here to get an accurate diagnosis. So let's walk through the steps. First, you're going to start with retrograde gravity filling of the bladder. Second, and this is key, you need to use at least 300 milliliters of contrast, or just fill until the patient can't tolerate anymore. You need that maximal bladder distension. Third, get a view right at that point of maximal fill. And fourth, you need a second view after the bladder has been completely drained. And here's a really critical point, something you should never do. Clamping a Foley catheter and just waiting for IV contrast to passively fill the bladder is not an appropriate diagnostic method. It's a common mistake, but this technique just doesn't distend the bladder enough, and you'll end up with a high rate of missed injuries. Okay, let's move on to Guideline Statement 14B, which expands our indications for imaging a bit. Here, we're told that retrograde cystography should also be done in stable patients who have gross hematuria with a concerning mechanism of injury, even if they don't have a pelvic fracture. It also applies to patients with pelvic ring fractures who are showing other clinical signs of rupture. So what are these other indicators we're looking for? Well, they fall into a few different buckets. First, you've got your clinical signs, things like the patient being unable to void, low urine output, an elevated BUN to creatinine ratio, or abdominal distension and pain. Second, there are specific imaging findings to watch for. If you see low-density free fluid in the intraperitoneal space, that's urinary ascites, that's highly suggestive. And third, there are specific fracture patterns to be aware of, like pubic symphysis diastasis or an obturator ring fracture with more than 1 centimeter of displacement. All right, on to Section 2. This is where we get to the fundamental branch point that's going to dictate all of our subsequent management decisions, figuring out if we're dealing with an intraperitoneal or an extraperitoneal rupture. So what's the difference? Well, an intraperitoneal rupture is usually a big blowout injury, typically right at the dome of the bladder. This type of injury absolutely requires surgical repair to prevent really serious complications like peritonitis and sepsis. On the other hand, an extraperitoneal rupture is more often caused by bone fragments from a pelvic fracture, and these can frequently be managed non-operatively just with catheter drainage. That brings us right into Section 3, which details the standard of care specifically for those intraperitoneal bladder ruptures. Guideline Statement 15 leaves no room for debate. It says that surgeons must perform surgical repair of all intraperitoneal bladder ruptures, whether they're from blunt or penetrating trauma. It's a must-do. And the rationale for this is crystal clear. These kinds of injuries just will not heal with catheter drainage alone. If you fail to repair them, you're risking bacterial translocation, which leads to peritonitis and sepsis. Plus, going in surgically allows you to inspect the bladder neck and the ureteral orifices for any other injuries. It's also worth noting that for isolated injuries, a laparoscopic repair is a perfectly appropriate approach. All right, let's shift gears now to Section 4. Here we're going to talk about the more nuanced management of those extraperitoneal bladder injuries. So, the management of extraperitoneal injuries really comes down to one key distinction. Is the injury uncomplicated or complicated? An uncomplicated injury, which we'll see is covered in Guideline 16, is basically an isolated rupture that can be managed with just catheter drainage. But a complicated injury, covered in Guideline 17, has other factors that mean it really needs surgical repair to avoid some pretty nasty prolonged morbidity. So, Guideline Statement 16 tells us that simple urethral catheter drainage is the right treatment for uncomplicated extraperitoneal injuries. Most of these will heal up just fine within 2 to 3 weeks. Of course, you have to perform a follow-up cystogram to confirm that it's healed before you take that catheter out.
Now, for the other side of the coin, we have Guideline Statement 17. This one recommends surgical repair for patients who have a complicated extraperitoneal bladder injury. And we take this approach specifically to avoid the long-term problems that can come from managing these complex cases non-operatively.
So what exactly makes an injury complicated? Here are the specific features. First, any injury involving the bladder neck. Second, if there are concurrent rectal or vaginal lacerations, which can risk fistula formation. Third, pelvic fractures where you can actually see bone spicules poking into the bladder. And finally, there's a relative indication for repair if the patient is already heading to the OR for other pelvic or abdominal injuries, since adding a bladder repair at that point adds very little morbidity.
Okay, we've made it to our final section, Section 5. This addresses the standard of care for bladder drainage after a surgical repair has been done.
The clinical question here is pretty straightforward. After you've done the surgical repair, what's the preferred way to drain the bladder?
Guideline Statement 18 gives us a very direct answer. It says clinicians should perform urethral catheter drainage without adding a suprapubic cystostomy tube. Studies have shown there's just no advantage to combine drainage. A urethral catheter alone is sufficient, and it's actually associated with shorter hospital stays and lower morbidity.
But, like with many guidelines, there are some key exceptions where you might still consider a suprapubic tube. These specific scenarios include 1. Patients who need long-term catheterization because of something like a severe neurologic injury. 2. Immobilized orthopedic patients. 3. Cases involving really complex repairs with closures that feel a bit tenuous. Or 4. Repairs that are complicated by significant postoperative hematuria.
And that concludes our review of the guidelines for bladder trauma management. It does leave us with a final thought. As minimally invasive techniques and trauma care keep evolving, you have to wonder, which of these evidence-based recommendations we've just discussed will be the first one that needs to be revised?